Today, we're diving into some eerie stories that happened during the summer. But don't worry, these aren't just made-up tales. They're real, shared by people who experienced moments that can't quite be explained. In the Firewatcher, a man alone in a forest tower begins to sense that something isn't right. But is it just his mind playing tricks? Or is something truly waiting for him out there? The silent retreat takes you to a peaceful place. But the longer you stay, the more you realize something's off. Are the people around you truly human? And is this silence really as peaceful as it seems? And in the cursed Carousel, a seemingly innocent amusement ride turns into a nightmare as people become drawn to it, unable to leave. But what exactly is pulling them back, again and again? Have you ever felt like your summer held a mystery that can't be explained? Share your story and don't forget to subscribe to the channel to keep exploring these chilling mysteries. Story 1. The Firewatcher. I thought it was going to be easy when I landed the job as a fire lookout. I'd always liked being alone, and spending a summer in some remote forest tower was just about a perfect deal against some cash and getting away from everything. My tower was deep in the woods of Northern California, far from any town. My only contact with the outside world, a radio link to my supervisor, Carl, told me what they all did. Watch for smoke, report anything strange, watch out for idiots who might be starting fires. Simple enough. It was quiet at first. Within a couple of weeks, it was already becoming months, and even the routine became comforting in its familiarity. I sat up in the tower, scanning the horizon, reading a bit, listening to Carl's fuzzy updates each evening. The forest was enormous. In the daylight hours, it was almost as if I had been left alone to see out this world. But once the dry season kicked in, things started to feel different. It was the lights, first of all. One night late, I saw them far below through the trees, faint glimmers. First, I thought campers, but the light was too, now erratic, almost deliberate. They would move along, then vanish, finally to pop up again in some other place. No pattern, no rhyme or reason to it. I mentioned it to Carl next morning, but he merely shrugged it off. Could be animals, reflections off the water, he said. Nothing to worry about. But it wasn't just the lights. There were whispers too. If the wind was really heavy on any given night, I could make them out. Soft, indistinguishable voices carried on the breeze. Here is the thing. It wasn't random. I could have sworn they were saying my name. I knew what it was like. The forest watching me, waiting for something. I had tried to ignore it, chalked it up to isolation messing with my head, but every night it got worse. The whispers louder, the lights closer. Then in the morning I see it, the thin column of smoke rising from trees miles away. My heart starts racing, and I am on the radio, calling it in. Carl's voice was noisy with the static, reassuring me to stay cool and only monitor it. He would send people to look after it. Yet the smoke wasn't the bad part. No, what really shook me was how there were lights dancing around the base of that fire. Frantic patterns of motion, almost as if feeding from the fire. I kept looking, and with each passing minute, a kind of disquiet grew inside me. Then in one flash, the fire jumped. It just exploded out of nowhere, spreading faster than anything I'd ever seen. In a few minutes, the whole forest downwards was ablaze. I called Carl again, shouting for help, but all I heard was static. It closed in, and I could feel the crackling of the flames, the heat rising up through the tower. And then a realization dawned on me. This fire wasn't random. It just goes in a perfect circle around my tower, closing in upon me, and the lights. They're just on the edge of the flames now, flickering in and out of view, waiting for something to happen. Panic hit me like a runaway car. Down the ladder of the tower I scrambled to make a beeline for the truck parked down the hill. As I hit the ground, I felt it in the air, a presence watching from the shadows. Louder now, The whisper closed in around me, echoing through the trees. I felt a crawl rise on my skin as my name came again this time. It wasn't the wind. It was something, or someone, right behind me. I ran. I did not care where, but no matter how fast I went, the fire always seemed to draw closer, and the lights, those accursed lights, they danced steadily in the corners of my sight. It was as if the very forest itself came to life, pushing me deeper into its heart. I wasn't being chased by the fire. I was being pursued by something from the dark. I reached the truck and fumbled for keys with shaking hands. Thank God it started. I sped up the dirt road, glancing back in the rearview mirror, and there, in smoke and flame, I see them. Figures, dim and indistinct, standing at the edge of the forest, watching me. I didn't stop running until I'd reached the ranger station, breathless and half-crazed. When I finally told Carl what happened, he looked at me like I was losing it. Sure, they found the fire, but no signs of a soul near the tower. No footprints, no lights. Just burned trees and silence. The next day, I quit. I don't care about everyone else's opinion. There's something out there back in the woods, and it's something that doesn't want to be found. Whichever it is, it's watching. Story 2. Silent Retreat. I went to this retreat for the clarification of my mind. Life had gradually become noisier. The constant notifications, social media, stress at work. Until that day, when I saw that ad, a silent, week-long retreat to a most remote mountain monastery. This was it, what I needed. No phone, no talking, just peace. At least that was what they had promised. Beautiful. It was isolated, surrounded by fog-covered peaks, the air crisp and clean. The monastery itself looked old, with stone walls that had worn away over hundreds of years, and the surrounding silence was heavy. And then there were 10 of us or so seeking the same thing, I think, refuge. Put in rooms, given a small notebook and pencil, to be our only ways of communicating forthwith, and the retreat had begun. The initial days went by just according to schedule. We would meditate, jog across the grounds, and at times even write notes to each other concerning the schedule. It was calm, for sure, but there was something unnerving. It tuned in rather fast. There was this woman, likely in her 30s, whom I hadn't seen at the induction. I would catch glimpses of her wandering around the grounds, but always out of the corner of my eye. She never wrote a thing, never spoke one word to anyone. First, I thought maybe she just wanted to be left alone, but there was something about her that was off. On the 3rd day, it started to dawn. I knew that this was not correct. It was not only this woman. The rest of the participants, too, were not all that proper. They moved slow, too slow, and none looked up at me. Each time, though, that I looked at any one of them, they were always staring, their eyes glazed over and remote, as if they were here, and yet not there at all. Then came the night when I woke up to find it slipped under my door. Not signed, just a scribble in shaky handwriting. Not all of them are alive. A shiver ran down my spine. I wanted to find out who had sent it, but the rules of the retreat forbade us from knocking at each other's doors, and besides, something told me the person who wrote it didn't want to be found. That night I lay awake, that woman etched in my mind, smooth steps which never made any sound, a strange dress, ill-fitting, ancient. The next morning I decided to pay closer attention to the others. Then it was that I realized how wrong it had all gone from the very start. Some of the participants never left their rooms, others hardly touched their food, and a few, well, I really don't know how it was that I never saw it before then, but their eyes just seemed to glaze over and become this sort of endless, vacant stare. The next evening, another note had appeared, scrawled upon the mirror in my bathroom. They don't leave. We don't leave. And that's when the panic kicked in. For sure, I wanted to leave this retreat immediately. And then the next day, it turned out that the path leading down the mountain was blocked, collapsed due to a rock slide. The staff told us that we had to wait until the end of the retreat when they would be able to clear it, but I couldn't wait. I had to sneak out that night from my room, back to the library at the monastery. I needed answers. I found this old ledger stuffed in a drawer, full of dust. There were names of people who went on that retreat inside. Some of them were known participants. Well, here's the thing. Next to certain names, these weird markings, nonsensical dates, going back decades. And some of those names belonged to people I had just seen on retreat, of people who remained in the town, or so I'd thought at least. I knew I had to get away. I packed my things, took my notebook, and slipped away under cover of darkness. But when I tried to make my way down the path, that woman again appeared right in front of me, barring my way. This time, I saw her clearly. Sunken eyes, skin pale and faded, as though she wasn't quite there. She didn't say anything, of course, but it was clear enough. I wasn't going anywhere. In desperation, I turned and ran back to the monastery, but now the whole place felt alive. The walls seemed to be closing in, the air thick with whispers that I could only half hear. I shut myself in my room, scribbling notes wildly, trying to make some kind of sense of it. Then, pushed under the door, a final note appeared. "We're always watching. You're one of us now. Still here. Still out on retreat. But the thing is, I really don't think it is ever going to be. Those others, those not living, they're just waiting for me to give in, not fight it anymore, and join them. I can feel it. The pull with each passing day to be one of those silent ones. I don't know how much more of this I can stand." Story 3. The Cursed Carousel. I wasn't really expecting much when I got sent to cover this summer festival in Seabrook. You know the kind. Small town, family-owned booths, local food, maybe a pie-eating contest if I was lucky. Seemed like a soft assignment, something to fill a page in the local paper. What I found there? Well, I still can't explain it, and part of me doesn't want to. All felt right until I came, save for kids running all over, couples dancing in the town square, and some vendors selling homemade trinkets. Of course, there it was at the heart of it all, the merry-go-round, intricately carved horses, beautiful to a fault, glistening under the summer sun. The locals were proud of it, said they restored it after it had been abandoned for decades, using parts from an old amusement park that had been torn down after some tragedy years ago. Nobody gave me specifics, but I got the feeling the story was glossed over in the same way small towns try to bury their darker histories. It was on the second day that things started to get weird. At first, it was just little things. People in town talking about the carousel more than usual, almost obsessed with it. They'd ride it over and over again, spinning around with blank expressions on their faces, like they were in a trance. One elderly man who I'd interviewed the day before told me he'd never ridden it as a child, but now he couldn't stay away from it. He sounded so dreamy and far away it gave me the heebie-jeebies. This actually clicked on the third day when I saw a change in the townsfolk's behavior. There was this violent underbelly, arguments over minuscule things like jostling for a place on the carousel, yelling at people who try to cut in line. Some sort of inside snap occurs, and this ride lies right within it. I decided to check the history of the carousel. I did some further rummaging through the town's archives and found an article from the 1960s about an amusement park that sat just outside Seabrook. It said the park had closed after a horrific accident. A child had died on the carousel. Nobody knew how it had happened. The report was vague except to note something peculiar. Locals had begun whispering that the carousel was jinxed, that it had been the focus of strange accidents long before the park had been shut down. Then I found something even worse. On the margin of one of these old articles, someone jotted down notes in some scrawled handwriting about some sort of ancient ritual. It sounded so silly. Much of ancient folklore does, for feeding spirits with things that have to do with tragedy. It told of a carousel or its parts, salvaged, being some form of vessel to something dark and hungry. So that by the time I returned, the whole town had changed. Now it was sweltering, like it is when it is just about to storm, but there is not a cloud in the sky. The carousel was still running, but now it just didn't ever seem to stop. Any time of the day, there'd be people on it, staring in some blank way, eyes kind of glazed over. And the way they moved after getting off, it's as if they are not them anymore. I once saw a woman push her friend away just to get back on. She didn't have any warmth or recognizance in her expression whatsoever. The trouble was that by that time, nobody was talking anymore. I tried to speak with the mayor. Nobody was talking. The only thing anybody was concerned about was the ride. I could see something else in their eyes, that same cold, wide-open hunger that I'd read about in the old notes. The carousel was feasting upon them, drawing them one after another into some trap. I knew I had to go, but not before I went to that carousel one more time. I stood in front of it, spinning, and I swear that in the reflections of those mirrors were shadowy figures standing behind the riders, speaking into their ears, begging them to stay. The horses no longer seemed carved from wood. Almost living, they seemed to strain and pull forward, as if to break free. I left that night, and that carousel picture hasn't left my brain. Several weeks later, I called back to check in with Seabrook. The festival was over, but something in town didn't quite fit. It felt hollowed out. I found no updates on the town's website, and nobody returned my calls to the paper I had been working with. The only thing I knew was that during a summer, something changed for Seabrook. The carousel wasn't just brought back to life. It had woken everything else up, too, that came with it, still going around outside, waiting for riders. And the worst that I can still hear in my head is the soft hum of music, as if it's calling me. Thank you all for listening to my stories. If you enjoyed them, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any future videos.